Welcome back to the show. We are here live on LinkedIn, and we are doing a session that's really special because we spend a lot of time trying to defend ourselves against the attacker, but we need to first know how they think. There's been a lot of legends in the industry that have had an opportunity to really play both sides as an offensive operator, red teamer, bug bounty engineer. There's a lot that we could build off of to be better defenders. So without further ado, run the intro.
Who says tech can't be human?
All right. I am pumped because on this stream today, we're going to speak to a legend and also someone that I can say is a true friend and mentor to many people in the industry. My special guest today is Jason Haddix, CEO and hacker in charge at Arcanum Information Security. Jason is also strategic advisor to Bug Crowd and field CISO for Flare. Jason, welcome to the show.
Hey, how you doing, Ron?
Doing great, doing great. It's good to have you on. And I was a little surprised when I was speaking to the Flare team originally, who were kind enough to sponsor this episode. And they said, "Hey, Ron, we know the perfect guest for you." And I was like, "Okay, who?" And they said Jason Haddix. And I thought to myself, anyone that's been to DEF CON, Black Hat, RSA, OWASP, SANS, BrewCon, you name the conference, they know Jason. And you've also been on the podcast before. And I'll say it again, special shout out to Flare for bringing Jason back to the show. Thank you so much. But if you haven't done so already, be sure to follow Flare. Jason, I think it would only be right to do a little bit of an update. You know, we saw each other at Black Hat, but we didn't really get a chance to catch up too much. So looking at the past 365 days, how have you been? And how did this opportunity at Flare as field CISO show up for you?
Yeah, absolutely. It's actually one of my favorite stories. So I was at a company called Buttobot doing red teaming with a buddy of mine, Luke, and a couple friends doing red teaming there, building out their red teaming practice. And it was a great time. But basically, I was doing this training. I had been doing this training for a couple of years, and the training revolves around modern bug bounty hunting and red teaming because the intersection of the reconnaissance and the asset discovery, they fit in both fields. And then I started getting into, okay, well, like I want to really build a methodology for red teamers that matches real adversaries. And a lot of red teamers, they focus a lot on the Active Directory side. They focus very much on those tips, that you get inside of pivoting inside an internal network. But what I was seeing from my history as a bug bounty hunter, as my history from even a CISO when I was a CISO at Ubisoft, was that there were different methodologies that different actors used, and most of the initial access actually was credentials. And so what I needed to figure out was how attackers were sourcing their credentials to get initial access and then do all the fancy stuff once they got on into the internal. And so I basically baked off every platform on the planet for credential exposure and a credential database that I thought was good. And I came upon Flare. I can't remember how I initially came upon them, but Flare was really cool because it had a free trial. So in the red teaming space, we were doing a couple of red teaming operations, and we were able to use Flare out of my last I've done quite a few now. I'd say out of the last 10, I'd say 6 or 7 initial access vectors were from credentials that came out of Flare. And they just had the best database for credential exposure that existed. So I reached out to them. I kind of became a power user. And then, I went on my own venture to start my own company, Red Teaming, and training. And they were like, "Hey, do you also want to be our field CISO and like help us out?" And I do a little bit of everything. I work with marketing, I work with sales, I work with products. I go out to the CISO community and I talk to a whole bunch of people about how to use this as a core part of their security program. So that's how I got hooked up with them. And yeah, I mean, I'm running 3 jobs extensively right now, but who isn't, right? So
Busy, busy, busy man. Yeah.
yeah.
And where did the name Arcanum come from?
Yeah, my company Arcanum, the name comes from a book actually. So if you're a fantasy reader, there's a book called Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, and I'm a huge nerd, right? I mean, you can tell from my office, right? And so the book Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss, the Arcanum is the university where the characters go to learn magic. And so that is the basis for the name of the company because we're heavily into the training space.
Love it. Love it. And congratulations. Starting your own company, leaning into something like this is different. It's not like having a regular job. I'm right there with you. I thought that going all in on my company would mean that I'm just working with only my company, but you work with a lot of companies because
Oh
you
yeah.
a service or a product to sell. So it's really great to see you partnering with companies like Flare and bringing some of that offensive mindset to defenders.
Yeah, I mean, to just be honest with you, Rhonda, the team at Flare is amazing. I mean, if I decide to hang it up for Arcanum someday, I'd just go work for Flare. Honestly, they're baller. So
Nice. That's what's up.
yeah,
I need to jump in for a quick break to tell you about our sponsor for this episode, Flare. In today's world, the cyber threat landscape is more complex than ever. With over 6,000 cybercrime forums and channels, 1.3 million new Stealer logs every week, and 5,500 ransomware data breaches tracked just this year, it's nearly impossible for organizations to keep up. That's where Flare comes in. Flare's threat exposure management solution does more than just monitor threats. It empowers your security team with the tools and insights that they need to stay ahead of the threat. Flare tracks over 60 ransomware groups and manages 18 billion credentials, offering you unmatched visibility into the cybercrime ecosystem. But Flare isn't just another tool, it's a game changer. Built for security teams looking to streamline their defenses, Flare often replaces multiple security solutions, simplifying your stack and reducing costs, all while providing ease of use. In just 30 minutes, your team can be fully operational and ready to tackle the latest threats with confidence. Flare's mission is to make cybercrime irrelevant by offering unrestricted access to threat intelligence and leveraging generative AI to uncover new insights. Flare helps you reclaim the information advantage from adversaries. If you're ready to transform your security operations, visit flare.io today to discover how Flare can help you take back control of your cyber defenses. Thank you, Flare, for sponsoring this episode. My focus over the past 2 years or so has been on, building content, but especially in the attack surface management side. And my main focus has been CASM, which is cyber asset and attack surface management. It's pretty much focusing on your assets and attack surface from the inside out.
hmm
And you, on the other hand, you have a very outside in mindset and experience. But I think that they go hand in hand. And in a lot of cases, the first step is recon. You got to get a lay of the land. And when I was working with a few ASM companies, they some of the prospects that they would speak to, they would say, "Hey, well, what is recon?" And that question would always throw me off because to me it could mean so much. But how do you help people break that down, the concept of recon, to where it's digestible?
yeah. So there's a lot of different kinds of recon that you can do, and they all fit inside of kind of a broader term of kind of OSINT, I think, right? And so you have OSINT as the top level term, is open source intelligence, and then under it you can do different things, right? And so really you want to boil it down to what an adversary is going to investigate about you as a company or you as a organization or something like that. And so you have several very key factors that you use in OSINT and reconnaissance, which is like finding email addresses, and those lead into phishing campaigns and credential operations. Then you have where you're looking for these kind of leaked credentials that might give you initial access, and then you have finding the assets, and that's where my specialty comes in, is finding the internet exposed asset that maybe your company forgot about, but I'm not going to forget about it. And that's going to be my way in, is the one site that you forgot to, decommission because you acquired some company and it's connected to your infrastructure. And I use that as a pivot point to, land either, a bastion in the red team operation, or I use that to find bugs on for bug bounty hunting.
When I looked at attack surface management and I first started learning about it, I realized that there's patterns in the way that we architect systems. And when you find something that is vulnerable, you might find, a few other things that are similar that are vulnerable as well. Like if the people are hosting a specific application in AWS, you find the production, you might find a development environment as
Yep.
well that's running the same instance, maybe even
Yep.
the same data, depending
Yep.
on how they got things set up. What is the pitfall for allowing someone from the outside to do reconnaissance and get a lot of information on us? Like where do we typically go wrong?
Yeah, I think it's a problem of scale for businesses usually. So what happens in the life cycle of a company, right, is you start off as a small startup, and it's like the Wild West, right? You have infrastructure in the cloud, you have some local infrastructure, and then you turn into kind of like a big business and you try to get a wrangle on, all of that and create, a basically an asset list or a risk register or something like that, so that you can make sure all that stuff gets into assessment, make sure things are decommissioned. But then you become a medium sized to large business, and that's when you start, basically acquiring other companies, or working with partners in an integrated way. And so these things usually exponentially increase your kind of shadow IT that you don't know about. And then that's where, you start to get. So when you have these big companies that do like bug bounties, or some of the big companies we work with as red teams, or big companies that are looking to, try to find all of their exposed credentials, it's really a problem of scale because they've just gotten so big. There's so many opportunities for something accidental to happen. It's not even malicious, right? It's just like, you forgot about a server here, you forgot to decommission S3 buckets somewhere, something like that. I spent a lot of years managing triage in the bug bounty world, and what you would see is the bug hunters submit on the back end, and a lot of these things are not overly complex. Sometimes they're really simple things like that, right? Like an S3
Mhm.
bucket gets forgotten about, or a file share, or some app that, you'll see the submission come in from the bug bounty hunter, and the customer will be like, I didn't even know we had that app. I don't even know what this is. And then they'll investigate and they'll be like, oh, yeah, that's from, X, Y, and Z 6 years ago. That guy doesn't work here anymore. I don't know what he was
Hmm.
doing. Yes, stuff like that. So
Let's say we're working in the enterprise and we are wanting to do some recon. How do companies at the enterprise typically go about it? Because you could hire someone to do it, but what if you wanted to give a stab at having your internal resources give it a shot first?
yeah, so there's a bunch of open source tools that I use in my bug bounty hunting and red teaming. And so really what you want to do first is, if you want to build, a homegrown asset list or risk register, right, based on all your hosts, to find everything that's connected to the internet, you can use a couple of project discovery tools. So project discovery is probably the most impactful open source contributor to I want to say security tooling since Nmap, I think, since the Nmap organization. And one of their tools is called Subfinder. Subfinder will take a top level domain and basically enumerate from a whole bunch of APIs on the internet all of the subdomains that you can find, and that can be the beginning of your asset list, as long as you know all of your top level domains. Which sometimes you may, sometimes you may not, but that can be a start, as using a tool like Subfinder just to get a good feel for what you have out there.
So I need you to be completely honest with me with this next question.
Okay. All right.
What's the craziest thing that you've ever found while doing recon?
Oh man. I mean, I found so much stuff, but one of my favorites was, it was a series of bugs I submitted through a bug bounty program. And basically, what I found is that it is a combination of OSINT and recon. But I found this host doing recon, and I was unsure what it was. And it was is a website basically that was connected to the internet, and it was for the person I was, I was the program I was looking at. And so I land on this page, and it's just a login portal, with the username and password. And I didn't have a username and password for this box, and there was no default creds, and there was no opportunity to hack it with something fancy like SQL injection. It was pretty secure in those ways. But there was some comments, on the page as that it was a software that they had purchased, right? My target had purchased software from another vendor and was hosting it on their own infrastructure. Turned out to be a CRM software, to manage customer records and manage all of their customer kind of interactions. And so I just on a lark Googled the name of the CRM, and it turned out that the company I was doing the bug bounty for had acquired that company, but had left
Mm.
all their own infrastructure up. They basically said, "Hey, we're big. Instead of rolling our own CRM or buying Salesforce or something like that, we're gonna buy our own company and do this that way." And so they bought this company, but they left the demo infrastructure up, that they used to have when they were before they acquired them. And so I went onto the demo app and I started using the CRM, and I was just capturing all the traffic, using it, through my Burp Suite while I was testing, so I can see all the URLs. And it's a demo, right? So you get access to the admin portion. You can look and play around. So I'm capturing all this traffic. And then I was like, well, let's see if they have access control set up for all these admin endpoints that are on the back end. So I replay the same URLs, but I replace this time my client's domain instead of the demo domain. And I was able to access all of the admin functionality without authentication, without a username and password. All of that was unauthenticated.
Mm.
And so this was a huge retailer. Like I want to say the name and blow them up, but huge retailer. I had millions of records. This CRM plugged into their advertising as well for phones, so I could send push notifications to all their
I
customers. I could text all their customers. I had all of the phone numbers, addresses, all this PII. So they did an initial round and they fixed the authentication. And then after they fixed the authentication, I realized there was an API as well to do all the same things I had done through the web GUI, but through the API. And so I tried the same thing, unauthenticated calls to those API endpoints. And I got a second round of bounties because none of those required usernames or required authentication either. So that was one of my biggest like kind of chains of bugs. And I mean, if I told you the name of the retailer, it would blow your mind, but I can't. But yeah,
Oh.
yeah,
Oh, okay,
yeah,
all right.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, that's pretty wild. Did they have other customers that they were, servicing through buying that CRM?
Yeah, they had a whole bunch of like relationships with like other dealers they were working with and stuff like that. So really, I had ins to a whole bunch of other companies too through that bug,
Mm.
but I didn't. When you're in the bug bounty world and you're doing that kind of stuff, or even when you're in the red team world, when you get something like that, you kind of have to pause and just report it as is and just see what the client wants to do with it, because otherwise. Pivoting from there, I could have done some really bad stuff, but obviously, I didn't want to do that. Right? I'm here to help, not hurt.
Yeah. For me, when I first got started in cyber, I wanted to be the best hacker ever. And
Yeah,
I started to realize that I could break into a lot, but I also like to get very close to breaking something. Like I think that that's the only way I know if what I'm doing really works. But one time I had an experience where I flipped a router that was running for over 10 years, and it caused a whole shitstorm.
yeah,
People were sending emails, and at that point, I realized I was, you know what, like it's important for me to like do what I need to do from an offensive perspective, but not, you know, break anything while I'm inside of someone else's house.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, one of my funnier talks I've ever done was all my fails as a pen tester, right? In my first years, and I was getting into it. And I mean, I have so many funny stories of, going into a place thinking I was some cool hacker, something like that, and then like absolutely like doing the wrong thing, like ARP spoofing a network and misconfiguring the ARP spoof and bringing down the whole network for the client, and like just a whole bunch of fails that are pretty common for pen testers or hackers who are just getting into it, right? I made all those mistakes in the early years, and yeah, it's a thing that can happen, and you learn from it. And
Hmm.
I almost prefer these days. I do a lot of red teaming, but I mean, I have started to do more purple teams where we'll like sit in Slack with the defenders and the program owner and stuff like that. And we'll just, as we do stuff, we'll tell them we're doing it, what the TTP is, what the tooling we're using is. Actually, I've been finding that really fun because it gives me a little bit of the blue side and it gives me a lot of the red side. And it feels like it provides like a lot of value. So that's been a good kind of pivot for a few of our customers. So, yeah.
There was a great question that came up. It says, as a cybersecurity researcher, I have seen organizations adopt frameworks and try to implement standards. And I think that that's Interesting question. Like, have you seen like these types of things as well in the past, like organizations adopting standards and frameworks? Do they work? Because I think that in like having a philosophy is great, but can you take someone else's philosophy or a philosophy that was given by a standard organization and adopt it and feel as though you are secure?
Yeah, I think standards like NIST and things like that, right? I mean, they are important to set baselines. I think that without them and without those baselines, we would be worse off as an industry, right? Because
Hmm.
nobody would have any information about what the what the baseline is. But you have to take it as a baseline. What happens is so many people, and you know this, right? So many people take it as gospel, and they'll take a NIST, or some other framework, and they'll implement the controls that says, and that's all they'll do. And that is not a full security program. So I think that they're a great starting place to model a program after. I think you have, you know, the way I think about it, running a security program from my stint and being in the chair, in the leader's chair is you have table stakes. There's a whole bunch of table stakes things you have to do. Like, EDR is one of them, right? Like you have to protect your user endpoints, right? And I think asset management is also a table stakes thing. Table stakes is part of your security program. And then based on your organization, then you add on these little other modules because they relate to your organization, your infrastructure, what product you sell. And that's how you build your security program. There's a fantastic mind map if anybody hasn't seen it. It's by Rafik Riemann. It's called the CISO mind map. And the CISO mind map goes over every possible module or component you could have in a security program that exists, but it doesn't necessarily say you have to have all those. It just says
Mm.
this is all the possible stuff. It's a really great visualization. It's a mind map where you can see kind of like if you had all the money in the world and you wanted to do everything under the sun, here's what it would look like. But you don't have to do that. You have to do what's relevant to your organization and the compliance that you're subject to.
Looking at some of the big companies, you gave an example of someone buying a CRM company instead of using something like Salesforce. Maybe it will cost them more to use Salesforce because it is expensive. To use any CRM, that's great. It's very expensive. Um, some of those companies don't have the same types of limited limitations on their budget. They can go and buy all the tools. Do you think
Mhm.
that, with having a vast budget, maybe even call it unlimited, that you can use tooling to eliminate threats, or is it really just managing the exposures as they come?
If you're running an enterprise level security program, um, and you're looking at your budget, you would maybe have probably anywhere between 20 and 100 services, SaaS services or subscription costs that you're paying for different security products at this point. And that's if you have a really healthy budget. I'm talking about like a big business, like you can afford those many licenses. But as you move smaller down the scale to companies that are, don't have that budget, it's like you have to pick and choose what is table stakes for you. And then among the table stakes options, let's say we just choose EDR. Well, you may not be able to afford the CrowdStrike, right? Because the licensing is so expensive. Or, you may not be able to afford X, Y, and Z. And so you may have to choose something that's more cost effective, which requires you to either do a ton of product research on what's comparable,
Hmm.
or if you don't want to do a ton of product research, you attempt to roll your own. So for EDR, obviously, you're not going to roll your own, right? But for other portions of the security program, you might try to roll your own. Like you said, asset management, right? There's a total possibility you could build a team internally to do a decent project of asset management. But luckily, in the asset management space and the chasm space, I think that there's enough vendors that are affordable that do a really really good job. I know Flare just acquired one, Fortrace, and so we're implementing Fortrace's capability into the Flare platform right now to add all of its ASM bells and whistles. And I think a lot of CISOs are facing this budget exhaustion, this little nickel and dime here and there that adds up to millions of dollars of security budget. And it's why you see a lot of vendors, bigger vendors, still in the game. Like when you go to RSA, you'll see people who buy the big billboards and stuff like that. And this year, they
Hmm.
were they were vendors that basically conglomerated all of these features now and have started acquiring smaller companies to make it an all-in-one platform. So you only have one ticket price, and it's one purchase. And actually that's another thing that you get fatigue on, right? The process of even onboarding a vendor takes time and money, right? And so if you can pay instead for someone who's not the best in class at the thing you want, but offers a whole bunch of the things you want, you might go for that instead of, 80 contracts that you have to, sign, right? It's the
Yeah.
Microsoft model. Yeah.
It's a double-edged sword for both. Like if you're going to try to build or go with the lower costs and try to save budget, but then also going with a one-stop fits all, there's limitations with all of it.
No.
And one thing that really stands out about your background is, not only were you an offensive operator, but you were, very focused and still are on bug bounty, which
Mhm.
is another way that you probably were generating revenue before starting your company and working with Flare. But it makes me wonder, having the guilty knowledge of how to break into environments, are security teams focused on the right things? Because a lot of the bug bounty researchers I know are more so focused on the web app. And, a lot of us in cybersecurity, we're really focused on least privilege, zero trust, trying to close all the doors when there's always a front one open and it's your web apps.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the vulnerabilities you're gonna have as an organization are probably gonna be um, through your web apps. Like if you have people looking at it like from a bug bounty or from web app pen test or something like that. There's just so much to keep up on in the web app world that vulnerabilities never stop in the web app world, right? Where like identity and access management, you can roll out holistic MFA, SSO, great bells and whistles around something like E5, where you do like do like checking for access from different places, and um, you can do all that stuff, and you can get to a pretty good point of securing account logins. And but like you said, the web app is always going to be the place where your customers have their private data, and so it's where the attackers are going to look. I think attackers these days, they'll check creds, I think, first, at least from my research, right? From my red teaming, right? The first thing I do is I'm going to look at the web apps, and I'm going to look at the creds that are already exposed to the dark web. So
Mm,
basically what happened during COVID was a lot of big companies. What happened was they didn't have a work from home policy that was like very well run, or at all. They didn't have one at all. And so what happened during COVID was you had a whole bunch of employees who were mandated to go home in different geolocations for companies that didn't have a work from home policy and also didn't have the even the IT assets to give them, like laptops and stuff like that. And so a whole bunch of people ended up having to go home and work from their home devices because their company couldn't even give them a device. And so they start logging into work portals, and a lot of these home computers or laptops, already had malware on them or were more susceptible to malware. There was no coverage for, an antivirus on them, or Defender was turned off or something like that. And so basically, over the last 3 years, Credential exposure has been at an all-time high, and you'll see it as
mm.
initial access ever. If you look at any of the breach reports, right, or if you look at any of the surveys around how, what's the initial TTP, it's usually someone buying a cred off of a market from someone who got phished on a personal machine or through malware on a personal machine or something like that. And so there's this ladder that when you're researching this of places to go to look for these credentials, right? The first one is public breach databases. So these are things that end up on like Have I Been Pwned and stuff like that, right? These are websites that get popped.
And
And then
this is your first stop.
first stop. Yeah, first
Mm,
stop. And this stuff is easy to find, right? And so that's the first level of the ladder. But as an attacker, the highest level of the ladder is the private telegrams, discords, and WhatsApp channels where attackers are actually selling compromised data from Stealer logs. And that's actually why I went with Flare when I was in the red teaming space, is because they have all these secret moles in there, and technologies that are parsing the announcements of all of these, and pulling out the Stealer log credentials. And those Stealer log credentials that come from the malware, like Redline and stuff like that, those are gold, man. I mean, for red team operations, they're absolute gold.
Flare VM and Flare IO. We're talking about Flare, the
Yeah,
company, but let's go ahead and
yeah,
readdress, what Flare does and
yeah.
how it fits into, especially the credential space.
Yeah. So Flare.io is the company I'm the field CISO for, and they're the company I used for finding credentials at Arcanum and Butterbot. And so they're the ones I did all the research for. There's a whole bunch of these vendors out there who basically trawl the dark web for credentials. They trawl all of the breach statistics, and they'll give you access to those databases, and you put in your domain, right? So we would put Hacker Valley Media in there, and you would see, okay, here's all of the credentials that ended up in these different places for anybody who had a Hacker Valley Media.
Zero.
Zero.
No, zero credentials on the dark web.
Okay, all right. It's just as an example, right? So Flare does that, but then they quickly realized that they were really good at data parsing the adversary forums. They were really good. I mean, the team at Flare who's doing all of this research, they have built parsers to build threat feeds that are very subject to your organization. The credential browser is fantastic. They can now parse GitHub for leaked code and credentials for your organization that ends up there. They keep on adding more sources of places where they can find this leftover and risky stuff for your business. And so it's really a cool platform to be a part of. I'm biased because I get unlimited access, right, as an employee. But it really is fantastic. So that's what Flare does. Also, Flare is the only one, when I did the bake off, they were the only one that did a free trial. So I could actually start. A lot of them required like a heavy sales cycle. Flare, you can
Mm.
get started pretty easily and just like start with looking at the platform and seeing what it gives.
You log in, what's the first thing that you see?
So first thing when you log into Flare is the Flare dashboard. You have to set up an identifier. So if you're an organization, you put in usually your domain name is one of your big identifiers, and then it'll go out and query its internal database to pull out credentials, leaked code, all of the things I just talked about, and it displays it in a dashboard, and it gives you kind of a health checkup, and it says, hey, here, is what you have to worry about. You're mentioned a lot here. These type of credentials are leaked here. And then you
Mm.
can drill into the sub dashboards and see where those are, what users they are, what passwords they are. You can actually download images of the malware that's affecting your employees. I've seen employee desktop screenshots before in the malware packs themselves. So you can, as a forensics investigator, you can see exactly, what's infected, or, what the user is, or what their machine ID is. It's a great forensics tool too when you're, doing investigations for this kind of stuff.
Cybersecurity for safety. We see a lot in the healthcare industry, quite often about medical devices being attacked. And I think when you start to publicize that type of information, it gives everyone ideas. I'm sure it's given you ideas as a bug bounty researcher and just a researcher and love of the game in general, but it also gives the attacker information on like, oh, wow, okay, this is a great way to hold hospitals or other institutions ransom because I know that they need these devices. Um, what do you think is a good way for us to combat that? Is it to do more bug bounty programs to create more awareness and opportunity for attackers, or is it to double down on our tools? We need to just hold down and just try to defend people that want to break into stuff.
I would say the methods that I do a lot of, reconnaissance and web hacking, those are already kind of publicized. People know about them. And so that's the thing. If tomorrow there's a 0-day in Apache, right, you should probably work with a vendor disclosure to, work with the Apache, Foundation, and make sure that that gets patched closed, in a closed loop, and then announced that there was a thing and the patch is already out. And, so the disclosure process for vulnerabilities that are that pervasive and that dangerous, things like Heartbleed when it happened, right?
Hmm.
Like, you would hope that, I can't remember when Heartbleed happened, if they did it privately so the patch out was already out, or if they just YOLO disclosed it on the internet. But I think that things that are pervasive like that, I think that you should work in a better disclosure process. I think for like web app vulnerabilities, I think, we're probably safe to talk about and disclose and make sure that people have all the information about how they take place.
Yeah, with something like Heartbleed, which took advantage of HTTPS SSL,
Mhm.
it's hard to fix something like that because you might disclose it, maybe you wait 3 months, but at some point you need to release it. And Heartbleed was one of those things that just didn't go away. It was almost like
Mhm.
the whole Eternal Blue, like a
Yeah.
lot of Windows devices out there that just they couldn't afford. It was less expensive to take the risk than it was to take the risk of restarting or upgrading that system.
Yeah, the Windows ones are crazy, right? Because what you have is a world that's built, IT infrastructure that's built off of bubblegum and popsicle sticks, right? Um, it may be simple for someone like me who's an offensive provider to be like, yeah, there's this critical vulnerability, patch everything. But I also know from being a CISO and from, being on the blue team side for a little bit, it's not always that simple, right? There are legacy systems that, are running on old versions of operating systems that, the developer no longer works at the company, and
Yeah.
it cripples your business if you disable that server because it's a integration point between two other servers or whatever, right? And it's just like, it's not as simple as people make it out to be. So yeah, those ones are hard.
When you look at SMB, small businesses, that don't have a big budget for cybersecurity, how do they go about using tools, investing in cyber, or even just living off the land off their current solutions to maximize what they got?
The more you can defer off, your security to other places because you don't have a budget or a staff to run your own security programs, I think that's the start. I think you go cloud first for pretty much everything so that you benefit from, most of the cloud providers security controls if you can afford those bells and whistles. I think that also then when you start to have employees, you have to worry about corporate security, which means that, I would say, the starting pillars of any SMB program are web security, because your product most likely these days is based off of some sort of web interaction. You have a website, you're selling things, or or maybe even a thick client or whatever. But you have to have AppSec. You have to have an AppSec program, right? And AppSec consists of scanning your code for vulnerabilities and doing dynamic testing against those apps when they make it out to production. Then you have to have asset management, understand what you're defending on the
Yep.
internet. And then you have to cover your endpoints, which is attack surface management. So you have to have an attack surface management, or at least a risk register or an assets spreadsheet somewhere. I mean, a lot of people start out with a spreadsheet of their assets, right? Like a lot of small companies, and then you have credential exposure. And I think that those are the four and a half pillars that I think right now are the ones that you can start off with. And then you bring in things like managed SOC, and you can bring in things like consultants for testing just in
Mm,
time. You can scale security testing with bug bounty. There's a lot of ways to work on a shoestring budget for a security program to have a really, really high value and high defense security program these days. So I think that there's a lot of ways to get to where you couldn't before with the services and products that are available today.
right. Totally agree. With the cloud and SaaS, everything is open. I,
Yeah.
I I bet for both of us, it's a lot easier to run a business when you have SaaS. You got these cloud services that make deploying or just even monitoring, maintaining, or you just pay someone a little bit more and you don't have to deploy anything yourself. What's going on with the GPT that you created? Are you still using it? And
Yeah.
also, what is this GPT?
Yeah. So early when OpenAI launched their GPT, excuse me, store, you could make GPTs in their ecosystem. So anybody can basically go to the GPT store on OpenAI, and we have one there called Arcanum Cybersecurity Bot. And yes, it's still updated.
Hey.
And so Arcanum Cybersecurity Bot is basically a bot that I built with a bunch of prompt engineering techniques in it that I've learned over the course of the last 2 years that make it just an expert in cybersecurity. So I have a tab open pretty much all the time, or when I want to ask a dumb question, or when I want to ask an advanced question about anything in kind of cybersecurity, you can ask this AI bot. And remember, your conversations with OpenAI bots are private to you. I can't see them or anything like that. But I published this bot for everybody to use. Seems to be one of the highest rated bots in the category of security across all of OpenAI. I know a lot of people that use it. And yes, so whenever I learned a new prompt engineering technique that should make the bot better, I update it. Um, I
Mm.
I also teach a whole class on how to write bots and do prompt engineering for security. I call it red, blue, purple AI. I address using
Ooh.
AI for red teamers, for blue teamers, and for purple teamers. And there's also a module on how to use AI for security leadership as well. So I've been deep in AI in the last year. So I've been trying to split my brain into like running this company and also keeping up on AI and credential exposure with Flare and bug bounty. I feel like if you have read the book that I referenced that my company's named after, one of the concepts in the book, in the fantasy book, is that these people who use this magic can break their brains into pieces and focus on distinct things. And that's what makes them really powerful. And they can control different aspects of the magic. And so I feel like that sometimes. I feel like I'm trying to break my brain into a million things.
Wow. So I'm glad you brought up Daniel Miessler because I'm super excited. I'm going to actually be able to meet him in person for the first time. We were supposed to meet last year at Black Hat,
Mhm.
but Black Hat's crazy.
It's
Schedules are
crazy.
crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
But I'm excited to meet him at the SANS AI Summit next week.
Yeah.
Super excited for that one. Fabric, everybody's been talking about. And I
Mhm.
think that with cybersecurity, we do onboard tools a little bit slower than we should just because of like privacy. And, we do have to think about things a little bit more thoroughly because there's risks associated with what we do. But I think that everybody should be checking out things like GPTs, whether it's, looking at the one that you've done or writing your own custom GPT or assistant via the API, and definitely looking at things like Fabric.
Yeah.
Everybody that I know has been just heart eyes for Fabric. So, how would a security team leverage a tool like that? Because I think that that could actually level up your way of thinking about something like credential exposure. Like, I need creative ideas on how I could find, whether my credentials are exposed online.
So Dan and I basically are best friends. We've been best friends. We worked with each other at HP, I want to say 20 years ago. And we just became thick as thieves. So we talk about this stuff all the time. So Fabric is a command line framework where you can hook it up with your OpenAI key and it can go out to OpenAI's, cloud hosted LLM, ChatGPT, or you can hook it up to a local model, which would be something, the best ones right now are from Meta, the Meta local models that you can use, or any model in between. It's basically a framework that can hook up to one of those things, and then you can start asking it questions. Now, the magic of how you get the models to give you security data is using prompt engineering techniques. And so this is a new discipline of how you tell the LLM to give you specific output, how you get it to be better.
And what's the applicability for like the enterprise? Because there's a lot of people that I speak to that have like an enterprise access to OpenAI, but they're
Yeah.
not necessarily using it because I mean it's limitless. So where would
Yeah.
you start if you were gonna try to build something for the enterprise?
I look at the security program and what the individuals are doing and look at their day to day. And I break down their day to day into what tasks are they doing and what tools are they using. And then I look at those individual work items and I say, how can we apply AI here to scale the human better? I'm not looking to replace the human. I am looking to scale the human. And so things like writing alerts, like everybody has a Splunk person, right? Who is, maybe probably one of the highest played blue teamers in your org because being an expert in Splunk, writing the queries, writing the alerts, basically ingesting everything, it's a hard job, and it's very in demand, right? Well, what if you could scale your one Splunk person that you have, to maybe now the juniors can do some of that Splunk work and help out, or you can build a bot to help do a lot of that stuff. And so um, I think that if you reverse engineer from the bottom up and how you can help your individuals, that's how I look at adding AI into an organization to build a better security program.
Let's readdress what Flare is and how it could really help security teams take their programs to the next level.
Absolutely. So Flare is a platform that does a couple different things. Their bread and butter is dark web monitoring and credential exposure data. So things that are posted on the dark web by attackers, passwords, API keys, references to attacks that might be happening to your organization. You can go to flare.io and it will monitor those places, and you can look at your organization's exposure for those types of things. But it does a lot more than that. It does now attack surface management, like we were talking about. It looks at your supply chain. It can also give you a customized threat feed for your organization that's not BS like so many other threat feeds out there that you pay for.
Mhm.
So it's really good for security operations, even good for executives, threat intelligence. Really, you can go to the site. There's a whole bunch of information on flare.io, and there's a free trial. So if you just want to go check it out, I highly suggest it. This is not just because I'm the field CISO there, right? Like if I wasn't the field CISO at Flare, I would still be using them as a vendor for my red teaming. And that's actually one of the special things about Flare is they're willing to work with, basically consultancies too. So they power if you're getting a report from your pen test team that you work with, and they give you a readout on all of your dark web exposures. A lot of them use Flare on the back end, and Flare works with consultancies like mine to help them do their red teaming. So it's a
Hmm.
fantastic company. fantastic platform. I should check it out. They've also baked in a lot of the things we started to talk about here in AI and generative AI application into the credential windows inside of the platform. So if you want to ask questions about, like what this malware was, or what this exposure means, or whatever, you can actually ask a custom built model by Flare inside of the platform in any of its windows for more threat intelligence data inside of the platform. So it's a fantastic platform. Check it out, and free trial, so you can just sign up and give it a drive.
Game changer. Yeah. And like Jason mentioned, try it out, give it a drive, and checking out our sponsors is really one of the best ways to support the show. So make sure you give Flare a lot of love. But also, Jason, a lot of love for you. Thank you so much for taking some time out of your busy day, chopping it up, catching up. I'm super excited to have our next episode. But before we drop off, what is the best way for people to stay up to date with the work that you're doing?
Mostly everything I do research wise is either done through Twitter or X, right? So that's my main platform, even though I know a lot of people have moved off of it. But um, if I have a thought that enters my head that I think needs to be shared, or I'm talking about tooling, or I release something, it's going to end up on my X, which is x.com/jhaddix, JHADDIX. My company is Arcanum Information Security. We're small but mighty right now. So if you guys are interested in pen testing or training for red teaming or AI, those are all things that we offer right now. And then obviously my company is Flare as well. And so if you're interested in more information on that, I am jhaddix at flare.io.
A lot of resources. By the way, all of Jason's resources are going to be in the show notes or description, or if you're watching the live event, you'll find it there. Jason, thank you so much. And with that, we will see everyone next time.